So what do we need to know about ActivInspire? Well, some of the beginning steps we've already covered, but we'll go over it again. First thing we need to know is over on the left-hand side of ActivInspire, we have our browser. Alright, this is called a browser because there are a lot of different browsers in here. Notice at top it says voting browser. Well, this is used for those active expressions or active votes that we talked about earlier, the polling devices where we ask our students questions and they reply to us using these input devices. So we can gauge what our students do and do not know. And we can do this in a private way so it's not embarrassing for the students. That is what usually opens up by default, is this voting browser. However, unless you have one of these devices, you probably won't use this very much. So what we're going to do is actually come over to the left and we're going to select the object browser. And the object browser allows us to keep track of all of the information that we put into our flip chart page. For instance, if we add in a graphic or we add in a background or we add in boxes or text, this is where this is going to go and be organized. Okay, and you may have noticed a second ago when I moved away from the panel, then the panel disappeared. When I move back, it reappears. And like we discussed in the last video, that's because we have not yet pinned this. In the upper right hand corner, you'll see this pin icon. If we pin it, now it will stay. And notice our flip chart actually adjusted for the spacing that is now allotted by the pinned browser. The next browser that we have is our notes browser. The notes browser you'll find useful if you want to leave notes about what you do in this flip chart. So what do I mean? Well, if I create a flip chart where students can move objects into a container, which think about this like a Tupperware container. Maybe you're taking your leftovers and put it inside of it and sealing it. If we have objects like that, we might come in here and put a note that says, have students move objects into appropriate container, or any other directions that would be helpful for someone else other than yourself using your flip chart. Now if we go to the web and we download flip charts, we'll check these pages out, the notes browser, just to see if someone left us notes. And if you do a great job making flip charts, you can post these up to prometheanplanet.com for other teachers to use, or if you feel really adventurous, maybe you can sell them on a site like Teachers Pay Teachers for other teachers who might want to pay to use your custom-made flip chart. The next browser over is our property browser. This allows us to adjust objects, so we can adjust the page size here, we can adjust the grid, and there's all kinds of other things that we can do inside of the property browser, and this will become more useful as we go through and we actually add objects, because this will adjust depending on what item is selected. So if we select a circle, you'll notice that these options that we have will change. So we'll discuss those further as we start inputting objects inside of ActivInspire. The final browser, seeing as though we've already talked about the voting browser, is the action browser. The action browser allows us to apply actions to objects or things that we put inside of our flip chart. Again, maybe we put text, we write some text in there. We can change what the text does. For instance, there's an option down here called append text. So maybe we're changing text to the word texting and adding suffixes on words. Well, we can do that with an action. So a kid could click on the word text and it would change to texting. There are also many other options that we could use in here as well. But notice if I tried to scroll or do anything with the browser currently, I can't because everything is grayed out. The reason it's grayed out is because there is nothing selected in our flip chart. We haven't put any items inside of here yet. We'll come back to this later. Drag and drop gives us some options that allow us to take our commonly used tools and apply them inside of our flip chart. so that we don't always have to go digging to find them. For instance, the revealer. If I drag this out, I can drop it anywhere on my flip chart, even off to the side of my flip chart, and leave it there, so that later on, if I click this selection tool, I can just come inside the flip chart, click, and now I get a revealer, which allows me to come to any side, click and drag, and I can reveal a portion of text. So if I have a math problem and I want to reveal the problem, I can do that and then later slide it down to show the answer. Now I can get rid of the revealer either by clicking on the revealer again or clicking on this menu item and just saying close. Okay, so that's it for the browsers pane. That covers all the sections. I'm going to select the object browser, and we'll just leave this up so we can watch what happens as we input information inside of our flip chart. So let's move over to the tools bar. On the tools bar, we have several options. The first one is main menu. If I click on the main menu, you'll notice I get File, Edit, View, Insert, Tools, Help. These are the exact same menus that I see up at the top of ActivInspire. So why would I need a main menu here? Well, that's a pretty good question. In the upper right hand corner of ActivInspire, I get this item that looks like almost 4 brushes facing each other. If I click on that, that takes me to full screen mode. Inside full screen mode, notice that the bar up top has disappeared. If I hover long enough, it will reappear, but it's gone. So if I want to access something in that main menu without hovering, I can just click on the menu options here and go through and make my selection without actually showing the main menu bar up top. This frees up space on my computer and eliminates some of the distracting extra features when students are at the board, so they aren't really focusing on the main menu bar or any other elements that you might have in your document. So I'm going to go ahead and click the red X to get outside of, So I'm going to go ahead and click that pen icon again just to get back out of full screen mode, and I'm into my document again. The next icon is Switch Profile. Switch Profile allows us to change our toolbars based on what items we're using the most. If you remember in the previous video, there was a setting where we could adjust our profiles, and I talked about being at the board, language, mathematics, media. This is what this was referring to. So for instance, if I'm up at the board and I make that selection, you'll notice the ActivInspire changes. It hides the browser. It hides extra features that I don't need. If I change it to authoring, I go back to my default mode where I see the object browser and I see everything as it was before. Change the language, and nothing really changes that much. I've got an option for mathematics, and when I do that I get some slight changing going on, but for the most part it doesn't look like anything is really changing. Finally, I could choose media, and again nothing changed. Well, what's going on here? I don't understand why nothing is really changing when I'm making these different adjustments. Well, the reason is we haven't set anything up yet, so we'll do that in a later session. But just know, if I wanted to switch a profile, this is how I do it. And the profile, really what it does is adjust our toolbar and the layout of the screen, so that's most beneficial for that subject or area. To be honest with you, this isn't something I use much, but you might find it useful, so again, we'll cover it in a future lesson. Moving down the list, we have desktop annotation, and we did cover that in our last video. And basically, that allows us to write on, or interact with any items that might currently be on our desktop. So if I click this button, you notice ActivInspire changes. I now have my desktop visible. If I had something up, I could interact with that. If I click it again, I go back so I can interact with the actual flip chart I'm creating. Moving over to the next option is Desktop Tools. Desktop Tools is a little like desktop annotation in that it allows me to interact with items on my desktop. The difference is I get this floating icon that I can click on and access tools that might be useful. So maybe I need a calculator. I can click on it right from my desktop and add this up. Why would this be useful? Maybe I have a PDF file or a PowerPoint or something open with math problems and I need to do a quick calculation. I could pull open the calculator, do my calculation, get the answer, and then insert it into the document without ever leaving the desktop. Okay. Now going around here, I have a couple options. Return to the flip chart, Express Poll, which, like we discussed earlier, allows us to poll our students. Screen Recorder, our various tools with rulers and voice mics and dice. We have different options for taking pictures, an on-screen keyboard, and then a link to Promethean Planet. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here and click Return to Flip Chart, and that takes me back to the flip chart I was working on. Again, notice when I return to a flip chart after I do desktop annotation, I get a new flip chart called Desktop Flip Chart. I'm going to close that out and say no, I don't want to save it. The previous page and next page options allow us to navigate through our flip chart as we create them. So think of this like a PowerPoint file or another document or a book even. This allows us just to flip to the next page, add more stuff, flip back, and so on. This also allows us to add a page. So if we create a document with items on it and we want to create a new page that we can go to, we can click next page and ActivInspire will create it for us. We'll see this being utilized pretty shortly. The next two options are Start and Stop Flip Chart Vote and Express Poll. These deal with the same thing. Again, we're dealing with polling our students, asking them questions that they'll answer so we can gauge whether or not they understand the material that was taught. Since I don't have any active expressions or active votes available to me right now, I'm not going to cover that because this lesson is actually geared towards using it as just an interactive whiteboard. Maybe in a future lesson I'll come back and cover these topics, but for now we're just going to ignore it. Now that we're down into the next section, as you can see divided by the lines, we're actually going to deal with tools that we can use. The first item is the Select tool. The Select tool allows us to select objects and move around inside of our flip chart. This is a very, very useful tool that you're going to use an awful lot. So I recommend getting to know it pretty well. The next option is Tools. So we get this hammer and a crescent wrench in an X form. If we click on that, at the bottom of our ActivInspire primary view, and I say primary because this is different than the secondary view, we get a list of tools that we can use. And you notice a lot of these are the tools that are up in our toolbar, but a few of them we don't have. For instance, Magic Ink is not available up there. Pen modifiers, handwriting recognition, revealer, spotlight, camera, active view, squares, rulers, protractors, and many other options. We can click the arrow to the right of this bar, and if there's any more available items, which there was a voting browser, then we can see those items appear. So these are useful tools that you might need whenever you're making a flip chart. This dice roller could be useful if you want to change the number of dice and roll and have a random output. I'll close this out and we'll move down to the pen tool. So the pen tool is how we're going to annotate inside of ActivInspire. Down at the bottom we have a couple different items here. We have highlighters, which makes a transparent marking. So think of this like a regular highlighter. And we got different thickness highlighters. We have pencils and different thicknesses of pencils. And we have erasers, which will allow us to erase elements. Now notice as I select different size erasers, this does a little bit different features. And that's because it's half putting the ink there and half putting it, taking it off. It's kind of like a sponge eraser. Again, I don't use this tool a lot, but if you want to, this is there. By the way, at the bottom of this, you'll notice that I have some color options. Okay, so I've got different colors. If I select a pencil, for instance, and I choose a color, blue, notice the tips of the crayons will change, and so does the color on the screen. So I can go in and select a yellow, and I get different colors that I can use inside of my document. This seems pretty easy to do, but also notice what's happened over here. If you look at my top layer, you'll see that my pens have shown up in different strokes. So I've got a pen 6, pen 7. If you didn't notice that before, watch what happens over here in the object browser when I select a color. I'm going to choose red. I'm going to draw. When I draw, a new layer is created. This time it's called pen 8. And that layer is above the other layers. What does it mean to be above other layers? Well, let's think about this in terms of clothing. When you get ready in the morning, usually you put on your undergarments, maybe you put on a shirt, a pair of pants, you put on a coat. Well, what do the people outside see? Well, they don't see your undergarments because those are underneath everything else. So usually they'll see your pants and your coat because those are the things you're wearing on top. That's the outermost layer of clothes. Well, the same thing holds true in layers in ActivInspire. The items that are up top, like this pen 8 for example, is up front. That is what is most visible. That's why it looks like the yellow and blue are going underneath this red stroke. So just for convenience sake, so you can see what's going on, I'm going to rename pen 8. I'm just going to double click on the name, and I'm going to name this red line. Press enter or return, and now I see it's labeled red line. If I drag this, click and drag underneath the other layers and release, notice what happens to my object. It actually goes behind the other layers. So the yellow line is now up top, and the yellow line should correspond to pen 7. So let's try that. Let's double click and rename to yellow line. When I do that, if I drag it underneath 6, now it's under the blue line. So blue line should correspond with pen 6. So I'm going to double click and rename blue line. Now I have all my layers named, so I know which each one of these items are in my document. And I can rearrange these however I see fit. So maybe I'll put the yellow on top, the red directly underneath, and blue on the very bottom. And you can watch as my screen changes to fit the order that I now have selected. Okay, enough with layers and enough with the pen tool. I'm going to come over here and we're going to move to the next item, which is the fill tool. If I click on the fill tool, I get a new box that opens at the bottom that allows me to select a color. So I can do that. I'm going to go select this nice lime green color. I'm just going to hover over anywhere in the document and I'm going to click. And what that does is that fills in the object with that color, and it fills in whatever object I have selected. So what happens if I go to the yellow line and click? Well, the yellow line turns green, and guess what happens? Because the background is green, it disappears. I can go to the orange color, and I can come over here to where I know my yellow line is. I can click and notice it turns orange. So the fill allows me to fill any object with a solid color. So this may be useful if you're trying to draw shapes or outlines and you want to change colors of elements. The fill is a great tool to use for that. If you come down to a clear spot on your color picker and you right click, you can change the fill color to a different option. Now you have two options here. The first one is a color wheel. If I click on that, I get a box of crayons that I can look at, and I can choose different colors just by clicking on them. I can also come across the top and I have different methods to select colors if I like. So maybe this color wheel where I can click and drag around and find a color that I like. So let's say a purplish color, and I can drag the slider to make the color match what I'm envisioning in my head, and I can click OK. Now that color is available for me to select and fill on top of another layer. I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to choose a different option, and this is the eyedropper tool. The eyedropper tool allows us to choose a color from inside of our document. So I can click on this blue, for instance, and that blue will appear down there so that I can fill the other layers in with that color. So imagine for a second that you have a photo that you inserted inside of here, and you want a color from that photo to be your background color. Well, we can use the eyedropper tool to select it, and then use the fill tool to fill in the background with that color. So hopefully you can see how that would be useful. Let's move on to the next item. And the next item is a shape. If I click on the shapes icon in the toolbar, I get a list of shapes down here at the bottom. And before we actually go through these shapes, I want to show you the color palettes at the bottom. These colors allow you to change different things. So the first set is actually the border of the shape. So if you look at these small images, you notice there's a black line around these orange shapes. Well, that's a border, and this is your border picker, and you can choose the thickness of the border. So no border, a thin border, medium border, and a thick border. So you can choose that and then choose a color that you like. Over here is the fill of the shape. What does that mean? Well, if you look at this orange circle here, you have a black border around it, and then there's orange in the middle. The orange would be considered the fill. It's the color that takes up the entire shape. So we can choose a color from here. I'll choose green. So now I should have a green shape with a black, thick border. Next, all I have to do is come up here and pick a shape that I like. And notice I have my arrow at the end, so I can click and see other shapes. I'm feeling pretty happy today, so let's go ahead and select the smiley face. I'll come up inside of my ActivInspire window, and I'll just click and drag a shape out. And there it is, my green shape with a black border. Okay. Now how is it that I happened to pick the same color shape as I did my background? Well, that wasn't a very good example, so let's change the color this time. This time let's do a yellow face with a orange border, and we'll change the thickness a little bit. We'll click and we'll drag out a shape. So now I have my yellow smiley face with an orange border. Okay? You can play with these. You can change the borders, and you can change the shapes. And you can draw out a few at your own pace if you would like. So feel free to play around with that anytime you like. Alright, next we're going to move over to our connector tool. And just like the shapes, our connector tool pops up in the bottom and gives us a few items that we can choose from. So we get some different shapes here and connectors that we can use. We get different thicknesses and different colors. So maybe I want to connect this smiley face to this smiley face? Well, I can do that. Let's say I want to connect it with a dotted line. I want it to be medium thickness, and let's make it blue. So I'm going to come up to here, I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag from one point to another point in the shape and release. So did you see what I just did? When you select a shape, there are these anchor points when you're using connectors. You can connect from any of these points. So I can choose a different, let's do the elbow connector here. We'll click from here and we'll come up and let's connect to the middle of the purple line. Now I've connected those elements together. So the connectors are just designed to connect two devices or to show direction. This could be useful in a map situation or in relating species, relating items together. So be creative, figure out what you can do with these, and just play around and have fun. Alright, before I move on to the next section, which is insert media from files, I want to go ahead and take a look at the layers palette. Notice that all of the changes I've made have been going up to these layers and adding in. If I select an item in my object browser, it will highlight over here so I know what it is. But already you can see that this is starting to get pretty confusing. I have shape 1, shape 2, shape 4, connector, and just by looking at this, I have no idea what any of these are. So I can select on them and it will highlight what the item is. Now, that's pretty good, but if I'm going to keep going in this course, I really have to learn to name the items that I'm using. So I could double click here and type in green base and do the same for the rest of these items. So go ahead, pause the video now, and label these items so that you know what they are. And when you're done, go ahead and hit play again, and we'll continue on with the lesson. Okay, welcome back. As you can see, I went ahead and I labeled all of the items inside of my video so that now I know what each and every item is. If I wanted to see the names of them a little bit more, I could click up here in between the objects and the hidden on this little bar. I click and drag to the right so I could see the names of the layers a little bit better. Now, with everything labeled, it's okay to go ahead and move forward in our document. So, I'm going to choose Insert Media from File. Insert Media from File allows us to go out onto our computer and find images, movies, music, any other elements that we would like to insert inside of our flip chart and use for our project. So to make sure we're copyright safe, I'm going to go out and choose one of my personal photos. So I'm going to click on a photo under Pictures, click OK, and there we have it. There's a picture of my daughter when she was much younger. Now from here, I can click and move this element around inside of the screen and edit it as I see fit. Well, the first thing I noticed, if I want to do anything with this photo, I have too many items on the screen. Some of these items that I labeled, that we just took the time to label, are now in my way, and I really don't need them. So I'm just going to click on those items and press the delete key. That will get rid of those elements from the screen. I can also move my image down and delete the rest of the elements. Or, since everything is nice and neat and labeled, I can just click over in the objects bar and press delete on each of those elements, so that I'm left with only the picture of my daughter in the middle of the screen. So this is how you'll insert media into the file, into your flip chart. You can also go to Insert Media from the toolbar if you like. And finally, we have a text icon over in the toolbar. If we click on that, this will allow us to add text inside of our flip chart. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a font browser, which allows you to choose from one of the many fonts that you have installed on your computer. You can always go out on the internet and find more fonts that are freely available to you that you can add. The catch is, if you add a new font to your computer, you first should close ActivInspire and reopen it for that font to appear inside of this selector. So I'm going to choose one of the fonts I have, and maybe I'll keep it simple and try to find a font that maybe most of you should have. So let's go down and choose Times New Roman. So whether you're on a Mac or a Windows computer, you can follow along. So I'm going to choose Times New Roman, and I can change my font size just by clicking on the down arrow next to the number. Choose 24, or I can highlight this number and type in one of my own, so we can say 36. We can also choose bold, italicize, underline, superscript, subscript, change the font color, change the background color of the font, the alignment, and so forth. So with this selected, let's go up inside of our document and we'll just click and we'll add a new font, add some text. Okay, so I've clicked to add new text. Now, just so you know, and to keep everything honest and upfront, I did have to change my text size down to 26. There was a glitch with my install, and with that install, I had an error and it kicked me out. So I stopped the video and I came back in to finish this training session. So that's why you see this number down here has changed, and you probably also noticed the upper corner that I have two tabs called Untitled now, and that's just because of, again, it crashed, so I had to reopen and start over. So I'm going to click on my text again, click in empty spot, and then I'm just going to add in some text. Photo of my, maybe I shouldn't capitalize that, my daughter. Okay, so now I have text added. I can also highlight this text after I've created it. I can go back in, change the font to something that I like. So I will go up here and we'll find something that maybe you might not have. I'll have a font called Chalk Duster, and I'll change the font to white. And maybe I will italicize this a little bit. No, I don't really like that too much, so I'll just leave that alone. I'll come to my select tool, and there it is. Now, that text really is not white. It's actually like a pinkish color. So I can go back to my object browser and choose my text, which I'm going to make sure I pin this again. Choose my text, and now I'm going to go in and choose Edit Text. Highlight again, and we'll just change the color to white this time. And I will click off, and I'm done. So now I've inserted a photo, I put in some text, and this flip chart page looks pretty good. Now, is this really that great for class? No, because there's nothing really in it, but at least now you know how this works. We've inserted image, we've inserted text. So, now that you understand the basics of these tools, let's go ahead and create a new flip chart. And this time, we'll use some of these options to help us out. Thanks for watching.